The theory of Neo-Realism is founded by an American scientist named Kenneth Waltz in 1979 during the ongoing Cold War. Cold War is a war that has been ongoing after the World War II ended. It was an attempt to translate some of the key insights of classical realism into the language and methods of modern social science. Alongside Neo-Liberalism, Neo-Realism is one of the two most influential contemporary approaches to international relations. The two perspectives is one of the two most influential contemporary approaches to international relations for the past 3 decades. In the Theory of International Politics in 1979, Waltz argued that most of the important features of international relations, especially the actions of great powers and nations across the world, could be explained solely in terms of the anarchical structure of the international system. This means that he simultaneously re-energized realism while also separating it from its classical foundations. Waltz also claimed that Neo-Realism is a more balancing and ideal theory. For example, in the international system, a bipolar system, which is two great powers, is more stable than a unipolar system due to its less prone to great power war and systemic change. Because there is only internal balancing in a bipolar system, rather than external balancing, there is less opportunity for miscalculations and therefore less likely of a chance to get in a great power war. This is a simplification and an ideal theory. Another example. During the Cold War, neither America nor Soviet Union started the war due to the power balance and nuclear deterrence. If one side started the war, the other side will react to it, and this will cause major destruction. Therefore, Waltz claimed that his theory can be applied here. Only proxy wars take place at that time where both superpowers repeatedly violating human rights. This made it hard for any sovereign state or any international organization such as the United Nations to intervene in force of the protection of civilian population due to fear and national interest, where most of them prioritize the life of their citizens and cost for every war they need to handle.
I will explain why Neo-Realism theory was introduced, especially in the international relation context. As we know, Neo-Realism started to emerge in the late 1970s. This is because of the emergence of Neo-Liberalism, which at that time was created to overcome the criticism that arises from the realism discourse. Such criticism arises when realism has failed to acknowledge the importance of economic international relations, as well as the changing role of the establishment of different non-state actors and the establishment in the context of changing economics. Therefore, to counter this argument, this criticism, Neo-Realism gained its importance. Next, we want to know the objectives of Neo-Realism. The first one is to interpret the discussion on state-based international relation through the structure instead of the human nature. In addition, Neo-Realism also wants to explain the tendency to interpret international politics through political and military relations, political realism, and also the economic tradition. Neo-realism is a restatement from the classical realism, but it has certain changes to it. Such differences that can be seen is when classical realism is explained based on human nature. This is because humans are self-interest and also power-seeking, thus making the states reflect that nature. Meanwhile, Neo-Realism is based on the international system. The absence of higher authority means they have to protect themselves and view other states as a threat to their survival and interests. Another difference between these two theories is that classical realism tends to emphasize on historical and philosophical. It is human nature to favor a certain behavior and be more philosophical in their outlook. However, Neo-Realism emphasizes on ahistorical and scientific The Neo-Realists want to develop more scientific knowledge on global politics by focusing on the structural elements of global politics. Last but not least, classical realism argues on the question of power. Meanwhile, neo-realism argues on the question of national security. The key organizing principle of international system is anarchy. Anarchy means that there is no higher authority above states. So, the neo-realist argument is that in the absence of higher authority, the states will compete with each other for power, because power is what really matters in the survival. But to survive is not an easy task. Therefore, the states must make themselves as powerful as possible to survive and reach their goals and interests.
Alright, I'll continue. Kenneth Waltz and John Mearsheimer had introduced two types of neo-realism, which is defensive and offensive realism. To begin with, Waltz's defensive realism argues that the anarchical structure of the international system encourages states to maintain moderate and reserved policies to attain security. Waltz had removed other features of international order and attribute of every state except for those he feels that fits with his theory. Waltz had made two explicit assumptions, which is that each state considers themselves as a single entity, which means that they may not be a single entity that consists of many states. Also, these states only follow certified policies to confirm their own survival. Because of Waltz's assumption being each state are a single entity, the balance of power becomes strict, or is known as an iron law, to ensure that no state becomes too powerful than others. Waltz's theory is strictly on the balance of power, for who possesses more power will further control the international system. On the other hand, Mearsheimer's offensive realism seeks power and influence to achieve security through domination and hegemony. Also similar to Waltz's defensive realism, Mearsheimer also thinks that survival is the main objective in the international system. Mearsheimer had mentioned some assumptions of his theory. Three explicit assumptions, which are: firstly, there are states who possess an attacking capability which can result in fights and destructions between one another. Secondly, international relations between any states only occur in an uncertain circumstances, meaning that no states can really be sure that the other states will follow accordance to their agreement, and also no state can be assured that their rivals will not turn their military apparatus against them. And lastly, is that Mearsheimer all consider all states to be rational actors, which means that they can do anything if they feel like it suits the incident. Mearsheimer tends to combine all his assumptions that leads to states wanting to maximize their own power instead of gaining a fair amount of power, as in Waltz's defensive realism. Waltz's defensive realism only acknowledges global hegemony, while Mearsheimer's offensive realism sees a dichotomy between global hegemons and regional hegemons.
Now we talk about the problems regarding neo-realism. The main problem of neo-realism is that they are more focused on the materialistic achievements, while realism is just an expanded thought of humanist philosophy. This makes it become unable to provide solution concerning the conflicts that happen around the world. While some neo-realists agreed that the primary reason for the international relation is for seeking security, there are also some disagreement that occurs between these scholars, because they don't know whether the states is aiming to survive or they just wanted to maximize their relative power. This is because neo-realism is said to reject humanity for the cause of material or financial achievement. This can be seen from the nature of a neo-realist, which are more towards pragmatic. Pragmatic behavior can be explained as a behavior that concerns more with matters of fact rather than with what could or should happen. They tend to only be satisfied with facts and statistics that can be proven, that has been proven, rather than ideas or imagination that aren't proven yet. with that being said, it is going to be a problem to actually to have a good bond between any other countries because of how differently their thinking were. This will affect their security, and also the other countries will have less trust because they know that the country is just being selfish or just only satisfied with facts rather than idea that is being implemented by others. So that's all for the problem of Neo-Realism.
Next, I will explain about the solution on on improvement this theory. The theory needs to be more on providing solution rather than stating the fact that the world will never become at peace. The theory of Neo-Realism brought by wars is quite dangerous because it will disrupt and threaten the sovereignty of other nations. Therefore, it is important to refute this theory brought by wars. Among the proposals brought to set aside the theory of Neo-Realism is to reduce the use of military power to demonstrate the power of a country. In this theory, most countries with a veto power look more forward to the advancement of the military field. By showcasing their military progress and sophistication, they are more seen as a great war power that can disrupt a small country and developing countries. In addition, the military nation of government also shape the international relation. For example, the North Korean government, famous for its role, is filled by the military. Therefore, the international bodies such as the United Nations need to investigate this military policy so that this tension and wars of military can be avoided. Next is to prevent a chaotic situation, or known as anarchy, as brought about in the theory of Neo-Realism. The state itself must play an important role to prevent a conflict from happening. A state of anarchy must be avoided by a country to avoid interference from outside power. In addition, the effect of anarchy also causes violent action to be taken, such as carrying out emergency or using military force to maintain the peace. This will cause the situation to become chaotic and disrupt the country's sovereignty. For example, the enmity between the Palestinian state and Israel has led to wars, and military force is used to strengthen their sovereignty of their respective countries. This has led to outside powers such as the United States as an ally to Israel, having channeled military aid. This is certainly not fair to a small country like Palestine.
As a conclusion, the Neo-Realism or Structuralism can be concluded as analogical theory who are practiced as a middle person to reduce the abuse of power from the state. In this theory, we believe that security is the most important element, and the Neo-Realism give a high regard for values of national security, which is the state survival of the country itself. And also we learn every state try to maximize their power and minimize the others.